It was one of those warm Los Angeles afternoons when everything seemed to move in slow motion. The sun hung lazily above the skyline, casting golden light over the city streets. Inside a luxury watch boutique on Melrose Avenue, the air smelled faintly of leather and polished glass. The quiet hum of soft instrumental music filled the background. It was the kind of store that made people straighten their posture as soon as they stepped inside. Every inch was spotless, from the marble floors to the mirrored shelves lined with glittering timepieces. The store manager, Ethan, stood behind the counter, reviewing the sales reports on his tablet. He was a man who believed presentation was everything. His black suit was pressed perfectly, his hair slicked back with precision, and his tone was always measured and professional. For Ethan, appearances defined a person, the way they walked, dressed, spoke, and especially the kind of watch they wore. He'd worked hard to get here. Years ago, he was just another retail worker cleaning display cases and fetching coffee for supervisors. Now he ran one of the most prestigious luxury watch stores in the city. Wealthy clients, movie producers, and professional athletes came in all the time, and he had learned to recognize the kind of people who could afford the six-figure timepieces displayed under glass. That day had been slow. Only a few customers had come in since morning. A young couple looking for a gift, an older man getting his vintage watch cleaned, and a famous model's assistant who had dropped by to pick up an order. By late afternoon, Ethan was getting restless. He was standing near the main display, polishing one of the cases, when the front door opened and the bell above it gave a soft ring. A man walked in quietly, almost unnoticed. He wasn't the kind of person who usually came into this store. He wore a plain dark t-shirt, faded jeans, and an old pair of boots that had clearly seen better days. A baseball cap covered his head and a pair of sunglasses rested on his face. He didn't have the confident stride or flashy appearance of the store's usual clients. He moved slowly, almost shyly, as if he didn't want to disturb anyone. Ethan glanced up briefly and frowned. "Good afternoon," he said with polite stiffness. "Is there something I can help you with?" The man gave a small nod and spoke in a calm, quiet voice. "Hi there. I was wondering if I could take a look at one of those limited edition watches in your display." Ethan blinked, a little surprised. "Which one exactly?" he asked, his tone slightly guarded. "The one in the middle," the man replied, pointing gently toward a sleek silver and black watch with intricate detailing on the face. "That one looks beautiful," Ethan hesitated. "That model cost nearly $50,000. It wasn't the kind of watch people just came in to take a look at. Most customers who asked to see that one had their credit cards ready, or their assistants waiting outside." Ethan studied the man again. The worn clothes, the soft voice, the lack of visible jewelry. He made a quick judgment in his head. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, forcing a polite smile. "That particular model is reserved for serious buyers. It's quite expensive." The man's tone remained calm, even kind. "Oh, I understand," he said. "I just wanted to take a closer look. I've always admired fine craftsmanship." Ethan sighed quietly and folded his arms. "Sir, we keep these watches secured for a reason. They're delicate and extremely valuable." The man nodded again, clearly not offended. "Of course," he said softly. "No worries." For a moment he looked around the store. His eyes moved over the shining glass cases and carefully arranged watches. He wasn't in a rush. He seemed to take in the space as though he appreciated the artistry behind every piece. There was a calmness in his presence, something patient, genuine, and unhurried. Ethan, however, didn't notice that. He was more focused on the next potential sale. He didn't mean to be rude, but he couldn't help it. Years of working in luxury retail had taught him to spot serious clients instantly, or so he thought. The man walked over to another display case where a collection of simpler watches sat. He leaned down, looking closely at one with a leather strap. "This one's nice too," he said quietly. "Looks comfortable." Ethan forced another smile. "That model is much more affordable," he said, a hint of condescension slipping into his voice. "It's a good entry-level piece." The man gave a soft laugh as if amused by the phrasing. "Entry-level," he repeated, still smiling. "That's one way to put it." Ethan didn't mean to sound arrogant, but he wanted to move things along. The man clearly wasn't his typical client, and he didn't have time to entertain casual visitors. He needed to focus on people who were likely to make big purchases. "Would you like to see something else?" Ethan asked, already glancing toward the door in case someone more important walked in. The man paused for a moment before replying. "Actually," he said, "I was really hoping to see that limited edition one. I've heard it's got one of the most reliable mechanisms ever made." Ethan's patience thinned. "Sir," he said, his voice firmer now, "that piece is well beyond what most casual buyers are looking for. We only show it to verified customers." The man raised his eyebrows slightly but didn't argue. He just nodded. "I see. Well, thank you anyway," he said gently, his tone still polite. Something about the man's calmness made Ethan uneasy. He wasn't being rude or pushy. In fact, he was extremely polite, which somehow made Ethan feel even more irritated. Maybe it was the humility. Maybe it was the quiet confidence that didn't seem to care about status or appearance. Of course, Ethan replied curtly, giving a tight smile. "Have a good day." The man gave a little nod of gratitude. "You too," he said softly. He turned and began walking toward the door. The soft chime of the bell rang again as he stepped outside into the sunlight. He didn't look back once. Ethan watched him leave, shaking his head slightly. He muttered under his breath, "People really should do their research before walking into a store like this." Across the room, another employee, a young woman named Clara, had seen the entire exchange from behind the counter. She frowned slightly. "You know who that looked like?" she asked, her voice low but curious. Ethan didn't bother looking up. "A window shopper," he said flatly. "Someone who came to browse and waste time." Clara hesitated. "No, I mean..." He looked kind of familiar. "Like I've seen him in a movie or something." Ethan chuckled dryly. "In a movie? Trust me, Clara, that man doesn't have Hollywood money. Look at what he's wearing." Clara frowned again but didn't push further. She had worked there long enough to know Ethan's attitude toward customers he didn't think were worthy. Still, something about the man's gentle voice and humble manner stuck with her. There was something kind in his face, something real. Not like the usual people who strutted in flashing diamond watches and designer shoes. Meanwhile, outside, the man walked down the street quietly. The wind lifted his cap slightly, and for a second a passerby did a double take, recognizing his face beneath the sunglasses. A small smile crossed the man's lips, but he kept walking, not paying much attention. He wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed drawing attention to himself. He liked peace, quiet, and treating people kindly, no matter who they were. Back inside the boutique, Ethan returned to his tablet, pretending to be busy, though a small part of him felt uneasy. Something about the interaction didn't sit right. The man hadn't been rude or arrogant. In fact, he'd been unusually kind. And yet Ethan had treated him with distance, almost dismissal. But he pushed the thought away quickly. He wasn't a buyer, Ethan told himself. No harm done. He didn't know that a few minutes later, everything he thought about that encounter would change. As the afternoon sunlight shifted across the marble floor, the boutique's calm atmosphere returned. The staff moved around quietly, straightening displays and polishing glass. But Clara kept glancing toward the door, still thinking about the man who had left. Something about him didn't fit. She had seen hundreds of customers come and go, some loud, some demanding, some kind. But this one had an air of simplicity and grace that didn't match his clothes. She pulled out her phone discreetly and typed a few words. "Actor, baseball cap, jeans, L.A." A few images loaded and her eyes widened. She looked up at Ethan, her heart racing. "Ethan," she whispered urgently. "You might want to see this," he sighed. "What now?" She turned her phone toward him. On the screen was a picture of the same man, smiling on a red carpet, wearing the same calm expression he'd had earlier. It was Keanu Reeves. Ethan froze. He blinked a few times, staring at the image. It couldn't be. He replayed the conversation in his head, the soft-spoken voice, the gentle eyes, the humble demeanor. His heart skipped. "No," he muttered. "That can't be him." But Clara nodded. It was. "I'm sure of it." Ethan's face paled slightly. The realization hit him like a wave. He had just turned away one of the most respected, beloved, and humble actors in the world, a man known for his kindness and generosity. And he had treated him as if he didn't belong. He stared toward the glass door, wishing he could rewind time just a few minutes. "You gotta be kidding me," he whispered under his breath. His polished confidence began to crumble. Outside, the street was quiet again. Somewhere down the block, Keanu Reeves stopped to greet a fan who had recognized him. He smiled warmly, shook the person's hand, and took a photo. Then he climbed into a simple black SUV, waved politely, and disappeared into traffic. Inside the store, Ethan still stood frozen, realizing that he had made a mistake, one that he would soon regret deeply. Ethan couldn't stop staring at the screen of Clara's phone. The picture of Keanu Reeves, smiling at a red carpet event, didn't seem real. He'd seen the actor in countless films, admired his down-to-earth demeanor in interviews, but this was something else entirely. This was the man he had just dismissed, treated with the kind of cold indifference reserved for anyone who didn't meet his idea of important. Clara, who had already begun to piece together the situation, kept looking back and forth between Ethan's face and the phone. "I told you," she said quietly. "That was Keanu Reeves. And you didn't even recognize him." Ethan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The cool confidence he'd worn like armor just minutes ago seemed to dissolve as quickly as the realization hit him. He rubbed his temples, trying to push away the growing feeling of regret. How had he missed it? How had he failed to see that? It was him, the one person who embodied kindness, humility, and class. It didn't make sense. Keanu Reeves, of all people, had been standing right there, and he had treated him like any other person who walked into the boutique without a care in the world. Ethan thought back to the way he had spoken to him, the dismissiveness in his voice, the way he had implied that the man couldn't afford the luxury watch. All of it now felt wrong. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. What had made him act that way? Clara's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He was so calm, even when you told him to leave. She shook her head. He didn't get upset, didn't argue. He just smiled and left. That's what people love about him, right? His patience, his peace. Ethan could only nod numbly. He had seen the calmness in the man. Now, he understood why it had felt different. Keanu wasn't just another customer. He was someone whose very presence carried a quiet strength, a gentleness that made you want to be better, to act better. Ethan turned away from Clara, his eyes scanning the boutique, now feeling like an alien environment. The luxury, the polished surfaces, the expensive watches, they all seemed irrelevant now. What good was all of it if he couldn't treat the people who walked through that door with basic respect? The minutes passed, but the feeling of discomfort only grew. Ethan didn't want to make excuses for himself, but his thoughts kept circling back to the same question. Why had he been so quick to judge? He was interrupted by a soft chime from his phone. A news alert flashed across the screen. Keanu Reeves, spotted in LA, stops by boutique. Ethan clicked it without thinking, his heart racing. The article was brief, mentioning Keanu's visit and how he had been gracious despite being turned away at the luxury watch store. The tone of the piece was light, even complimentary, but Ethan's stomach churned with the knowledge that he was the one responsible for that moment of dismissal. That was when it hit him. It wasn't just the disappointment he was feeling, it was shame, deep, gut-wrenching shame. He had, in essence, turned away someone who represented everything he wished people could be, humble, kind, and easygoing, despite being one of the world's most famous faces. Ethan stood there, frozen, as Clara continued to sort some papers at the counter. He didn't know what to do. Should he call the actor? Should he apologize? The thought of doing so seemed impossible. Would it even matter? How could an apology undo the sting of being treated that way? He ran his hand through his hair, the realization hitting harder with each passing second. He had spent so much of his life building a reputation on appearance, on the idea that success was determined by what you wore and what you could buy. But now, faced with this stark truth, Ethan saw that real success had nothing to do with money, prestige, or luxury. It had everything to do with how you treated others, especially those who couldn't do anything for you. Ethan had learned that lesson the hard way. The next hour crawled by. The store was still quiet, with only a few more customers browsing. Ethan had stopped trying to focus on the numbers on his tablet. Instead, he replayed the scene over and over in his mind. The way the man had asked to see the watch, the kindness in his voice, the way Ethan had looked at him and assumed he was just another window shopper. His face burned with embarrassment each time the memory resurfaced. When his shift ended, Ethan didn't feel like going home. He was far too restless. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and walked out into the evening air. The streets of Los Angeles felt a little different now, quieter somehow, even though the traffic still hummed around him. He walked aimlessly for a few blocks, the weight of his mistake hanging over him like a dark cloud. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't a big deal. People made mistakes all the time, right? But deep down, he knew that this wasn't just any mistake. It was a mistake that had cost him more than a sale. It had cost him something intangible, a chance to do better, to be better. As he walked, he found himself heading in the direction of a small cafe. The bright lights inside looked warm and inviting, the clink of cups and the soft murmur of conversation spilling out onto the street. It was the kind of place where people sat alone, sipping coffee or reading a book. Ethan wasn't in the mood for crowds, but something about the calmness of the cafe drew him in. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The barista behind the counter gave him a quick nod, recognizing him from the many times he had come in before. Ethan didn't respond. He was lost in his own thoughts. He ordered a black coffee and sat at a small table near the window, staring out into the street. As he sipped his coffee, the events of the day replayed in his mind. He thought about Keanu, not as an actor, but as the person he had just met. The kind, humble person who didn't demand anything from anyone, who had walked into his store, asked for nothing but to look at a watch, and been treated like he didn't belong. Ethan's phone buzzed again, pulling him from his thoughts. It was another news update. Keanu Reeves receives award for philanthropy. Ethan opened the article and read it quickly. The headline was followed by a story about Keanu's ongoing efforts to support children's hospitals, charities, and underprivileged communities. It seemed like there was no end to his generosity. Keanu wasn't just an actor. He was a man who had consistently used his platform to make the world a better place. And here was Ethan, sitting in a cafe, thinking about how he had treated him like an inconvenience. He finished his coffee in a few swallows, the bitterness of the drink matching the bitterness in his chest. A few days passed, and Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of regret. The story of what had happened at the boutique had already spread among the staff. Clara had mentioned it to a few of the others, and now every time he walked through the door, it felt like the air was different. They didn't treat him with any less respect, but Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of his actions. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let it go. He had to make things right. He had to apologize. But how? He didn't know where Keanu lived, and he certainly wasn't going to track him down like a fan. But the idea of doing nothing felt even worse than the thought of facing the consequences of his actions. Ethan made a decision. He would write an apology letter. He'd keep it simple, sincere, and humble. He would send it to the actor through his publicist, explaining the mistake he had made, acknowledging his behavior, and apologizing for the way he had treated him. It wasn't going to erase what happened, but at least he could try to show the respect Keanu deserved. That night, Ethan sat down at his desk, grabbed a pen, and began writing the letter. His hand shook a little, but he didn't stop. He poured everything into it, the regret, the lessons learned, and the hope that Keanu would understand. Ethan didn't know it at the time, but that letter would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just his view of the world, but also how he interacted with others, especially those who didn't fit his idea of who belonged in places like the luxury watch store. In the coming days, Ethan would realize that sometimes the most important lessons came when you least expected them. And they didn't always come from books or managers, but from ordinary people you never thought would make a difference. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the letter he had just written. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as if the words he had just typed weren't enough. He had crafted the letter with care, each word chosen to express his regret, each sentence written with a sincere desire to make things right. It wasn't just an apology. It was a recognition of the mistake he had made, a step towards understanding that success was measured not by what you could acquire, but by how you treated others. He had signed it simply, Ethan, the manager of the boutique. The letter sat there on the desk untouched for several moments. Ethan's heart was racing. What if Keanu never read it? What if it ended up in the hands of someone who'd just toss it aside? The thought of that made him feel even worse. He had to at least try. It was the right thing to do. With a deep breath, he hit send, and the email was gone. He leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling, a mixture of relief and anxiety washing over him. The decision had been made, but now he had to wait. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Days passed without a word. Ethan kept checking his inbox obsessively, hoping to see some kind of response, but there was nothing. The email sat unanswered, like an unopened letter from a faraway place. The guilt didn't subside. In fact, it felt heavier each day. The morning would come and he'd open the store, going through the motions of his routine. But in the back of his mind, there was always that question. Was this the end? Had he truly done enough to right his wrong? Then, one afternoon, nearly a week after he had sent the letter, his phone buzzed. It was an email notification. His pulse quickened as he opened the message. Scanning the subject line, "Re-apology." He clicked it open with trembling hands. The email was brief but direct, yet there was something in the tone that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. Dear Ethan, thank you for your kind words. It's never easy to acknowledge mistakes, but I appreciate your honesty. No one is perfect, and we all have moments we wish we could take back. I want you to know that I don't hold anything against you. If you ever need to talk, or if you'd like to chat about watches or anything really, feel free to reach out. Best, Keanu. For a moment, Ethan couldn't move. He reread the email, then reread it again, trying to understand what had just happened. Keanu had responded. He hadn't just dismissed it. He hadn't been offended. Instead, he had responded with kindness and grace, the same qualities that had made Ethan feel small in the first place. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to breathe. He didn't know what he had expected from the actor, but it certainly wasn't this level of understanding. Keanu didn't see the need to scold him, to make him feel worse. Instead, he had chosen to offer something far more valuable: forgiveness. Ethan felt a wave of relief flood through him. It wasn't the kind of relief you get when you avoid punishment. It was the kind of relief that came from knowing you had been allowed a second chance. The days that followed were quieter than usual. Ethan still found himself reflecting on the exchange, but now with a clearer mind. He'd expected Keanu to have moved on, to brush off the incident as just another part of a busy life. But instead, the actor's response had made Ethan feel like the encounter had meant something more. It wasn't just a random act of kindness. It was a reminder that being humble, being honest, and being willing to admit your mistakes were things that connected people on a deeper level. As the store's schedule grew busier, with clients coming and going as usual, Ethan took a moment each day to appreciate the simplicity of the lessons he had learned. He no longer looked at his customers the same way. He wasn't looking for the next sale, the next commission, or the next person who fit into the right mold. Instead, he focused on creating an atmosphere of respect, no matter who walked through the door. Clara noticed the change too. She saw the way Ethan interacted with people now, the patience in his voice, the attentiveness he gave to every customer, whether they were looking to spend hundreds or just browsing. It was clear that something had shifted in him. One afternoon, as the store began to quiet down, Clara pulled Ethan aside. "Hey," she said, her tone a little softer than usual. "You're different lately." "I don't know what happened, but it's like..." "I don't know. You're more present, I guess. Not just with the customers, but with everything." Ethan smiled, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet sincerity. "I think I finally get it," he said simply. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Get what?" Ethan paused for a moment, his gaze drifting to the watches on display. The sleek timepieces that had once been symbols of success to him now seemed like mere objects. Beautiful, sure, but just objects all the same. That things like this, he gestured toward the displays, don't define success. People do. Clara didn't respond at first, as if letting the words sink in. Finally, she nodded. "I think I understand what you mean." It wasn't a big revelation, and it wasn't some grand change that immediately transformed everything around him. But in that moment, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. It was a peace he hadn't felt in a long time, maybe ever. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing you're on the right path, even if it's a little less flashy and a little less polished than before. Then, a few weeks later, as the morning sun peeked through the windows, the unexpected happened. The door of the boutique swung open and the soft chime of the bell rang out. Ethan looked up, already preparing himself for the usual client. Maybe someone looking for a new watch or a simple cleaning. But then he froze. It was him, Keanu Reeves. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the actor walked in, wearing the same calm expression Ethan remembered from that first day. But this time there was no baseball cap or sunglasses. Instead, Keanu was dressed simply in a gray sweater and jeans, his warm smile reaching his eyes as he greeted Ethan. "Hi there," Keanu said, his voice easy and unassuming. "I hope it's okay that I dropped by. I was thinking about our last conversation and I wanted to check out that watch I asked about before." Ethan stood frozen for a moment, unsure of how to react. This wasn't just another customer. This wasn't someone he could brush off. This was the same man he had dismissed, the one who had shown him a level of grace and humility that he hadn't truly understood until now. "Of course," Ethan managed to say, his voice a little shaky. "Please let me get that for you." As he moved toward the display case, he couldn't help but feel a wave of gratitude. Keanu hadn't come in to scold him or demand an apology. He hadn't even mentioned their previous interaction. Instead, he had come in to look at watches, to talk, and to connect. Ethan unlocked the case and placed the watch on the counter in front of Keanu. The actor looked at it with interest, turning it over gently in his hands. "It's beautiful," Keanu said, his tone quiet but appreciative. "I think I'll take it. And I've been thinking, maybe you and I could grab coffee sometime, just talk. You know, about life, about watches, whatever." Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of humility and awe. Here was the man he had wronged, the man who had every reason to hold a grudge. Yet all he wanted was to connect. "Of course," Ethan said, finally finding his voice. "I'd love that." The transaction went smoothly, but it wasn't about the sale. It wasn't about the watch. It was about something much bigger. Keanu hadn't come in for a luxury item or a status symbol. He had come in because he recognized the value of people, not just the watches they wore or the money they spent. And as Ethan handed him the box with the watch inside, he couldn't help but feel that he had learned something invaluable. It wasn't about impressing people. It was about treating them well. The rest would follow. Keanu paid for the watch and left the boutique with a smile, leaving Ethan standing there, feeling more fulfilled than he had in a long time. The lesson wasn't lost on him. Success wasn't in the watches. It wasn't in the fancy storefront or the wealth of his clients. Success was in how you treated the people who walked into your life, no matter who they were. And Ethan, for the first time, truly understood that. The following weeks were different in ways that Ethan hadn't expected. After Keanu had walked into the boutique and they had shared that brief but meaningful conversation, everything seemed to shift. It wasn't just about a single incident anymore. It wasn't just about that one day when he had acted thoughtlessly. It was about a deeper understanding of what it meant to connect with others, to listen, and to truly see people for who they were, not for what they could offer. Ethan had always thought he understood the importance of good customer service. It was part of his job after all. But now he realized it wasn't just about selling something. It was about the experience, about how people felt when they left. He couldn't help but think back to all the times he had put on a polished smile, dealt with customers as transactions, and moved on to the next one. The person in front of him had always been just that, a customer. But now he saw people in a different light. Each person who walked through that door was more than just someone looking to spend money. They were people, with lives, stories, and emotions just like him. Every morning as he opened the store, the routine felt different. He would greet customers with a new energy, not because he had to, but because he genuinely wanted to. There was a calmness in him now, a peace that came from knowing he was making an effort to do better. He no longer rushed to make a sale. Instead, he focused on the conversation. He listened more. He was patient. And he found that it made all the difference. Clara had noticed the change too. She had worked with Ethan long enough to know when he was truly engaged and when he was simply going through the motions. And now she saw a level of care in his interactions that hadn't been there before. One morning, While they were both tidying up the store before opening, she spoke up. "You know," she said, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking about something. Ever since that incident with Keanu, you've been different. Like in a good way." Ethan looked up from his task, a little surprised.
Different how?
Clara smiled, leaning against the counter. "You've stopped looking at people like they're just walking wallets. You actually listen to them now. I've seen you spend time with people, even when they're not buying anything. It's like you actually care, instead of just pushing for a sale." Ethan couldn't help but smile at the compliment, though it was more of a recognition of his own internal shift than anything external. "I guess you could say I've had some time to think about things," he said, his tone more thoughtful than usual. Clara gave him a curious look. "You don't have to get all deep on me, but it's nice to see you like this. You seem happier." Ethan chuckled softly, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I guess I am. It's funny, isn't it? I always thought happiness came from achieving something, like getting a sale or buying the next thing, but it's not like that at all." Clara nodded, clearly understanding what he meant. "It's the little things. You know, the connections you make with people. It's not always about the big wins. It's the moments in between that matter." Ethan thought about that for a moment. He had spent so much of his life focused on the end goal, the money, the prestige, the recognition, that he had missed the beauty of the journey itself. He had never considered how much more fulfilling it could be to simply live in the moment, to listen, to truly be there for someone else. A few days later, as Ethan was walking out of the boutique to grab a quick lunch, his phone buzzed again. This time the message was unexpected. It was from Keanu. "Hey Ethan, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to let you know I'm doing a charity event next month for children's hospitals, and I thought I'd reach out. I know you've had a lot on your plate lately, but I was wondering if you'd like to come and join us. It's a small gathering, nothing too big, but I think it could be fun." Ethan stopped in his tracks. He read the message again, making sure he wasn't misreading it. Keanu, the man he had so carelessly dismissed weeks ago, was inviting him to a charity event. A man who had every right to ignore him, to forget their brief interaction entirely, had instead reached out, offering an opportunity to be a part of something bigger than himself. Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and humility. How had he gone from treating Keanu like an afterthought to now being invited to something that felt so meaningful? The truth was he wasn't sure, but he knew one thing for sure: this was another lesson. A chance to show up, to take part in something for the right reasons, and to keep learning. He quickly typed back, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Thank you so much, Keanu. I'd be honored to attend. I really appreciate the invitation." A few minutes later, he received a simple reply. "Great. Looking forward to seeing you there." The event took place in a cozy, elegant venue on the outskirts of the city, and as Ethan arrived, he was immediately struck by how different it felt from the high-end boutique he was used to. The walls were adorned with art from local artists, and the atmosphere was warm and inviting. People were talking, laughing, and genuinely enjoying each other's company. It wasn't about showing off or pretending to be someone you weren't. It was about making a difference even in the smallest of ways. Ethan felt out of place at first. He wasn't used to this kind of event. The other guests were mostly philanthropists, artists, and people who had dedicated their lives to causes much bigger than anything he had been involved with. But Keanu noticed him immediately, walking over with a smile and a handshake. "I'm glad you could make it," Keanu said warmly. "This means a lot to me, and I think it's going to be a great day." Ethan smiled, feeling an odd sense of calm wash over him. "Thanks for the invite. I'm really glad to be here." As the event continued, Ethan found himself talking to people he never would have expected to meet. He listened to stories of incredible charitable work, of people who had spent their lives helping children, the elderly, and those in need. He realized that this world, the one he had only brushed against in his career, was so much bigger than he had imagined. He was learning what true success looked like. It wasn't in the wealth you acquired, but in the difference you made in the lives of others. Keanu was everywhere at the event, not as a celebrity but as a friend, a mentor, a person who genuinely cared. He took the time to speak with everyone, to listen, and to offer his help however he could. It was clear that his fame had never changed who he was. He wasn't there to collect praise or recognition. He was there because he believed in the cause and he wanted others to believe in it too. As the night wore on, Ethan found himself sitting in a corner with a group of people, sharing stories and laughing. He felt connected in a way he never had before. There was something about being surrounded by people who cared about the world in such a genuine way that made him feel more alive than any sale or achievement ever had. When the evening finally drew to a close, Keanu came over to thank everyone for attending. Ethan watched as he spoke to each guest with the same warmth and respect he had shown from the moment they had met. Keanu wasn't just attending the event. He was part of it, and that was the key to why it worked. It wasn't about appearances. It was about intention. As Ethan stood to leave, Keanu caught his eye and waved him over. "Ethan, I'm really glad you came tonight," Keanu said, his voice sincere. "I hope this gave you something to think about." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "It definitely did. Thanks for showing me a different way of seeing things." Keanu smiled, his eyes kind. "Sometimes it's the people you least expect who end up teaching you the most. You'll find your way, just keep listening." As Ethan walked out of the venue, his mind was racing. He had come to this event thinking he would simply be an observer, but instead he felt like a participant. He realized that he was no longer just standing on the sidelines of life. He was beginning to make a difference, however small it might be, and he felt better for it. For the first time, Ethan truly understood what it meant to lead with kindness, humility, and intention. He had spent too long focused on the wrong things, and now he was finally starting to see the world for what it really was. The weeks after the charity event felt like a blur. Ethan found himself walking through each day with a newfound sense of purpose. The lessons he had learned from that day and from Keanu's kindness stayed with him, shaping how he interacted with the world. The boutique felt different, not just because of the changes in him, but because of the way he now saw every interaction, not as a transaction, but as an opportunity to make someone's day a little bit better. Ethan was still the manager of the luxury watch store, but the way he approached his work had changed entirely. He no longer measured success by the amount of money he made or the status he had acquired. Instead, success became about how he made people feel, whether they walked out of the store with a new watch or simply left with a smile. The customers who walked into the boutique noticed the change too. They commented on how different the atmosphere felt, how much more welcoming and personal it had become. Ethan found himself spending more time talking to the regulars, asking about their lives, their families, and their interests. He was genuinely interested, no longer just trying to make a sale, but trying to connect. One afternoon, an elderly man walked into the store, looking a bit lost. Ethan noticed him right away. He didn't look like someone who would typically purchase a high-end timepiece, but Ethan didn't judge. He walked over to the man, greeting him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" The man looked up, slightly startled, and then smiled back. "Oh, I'm just browsing, son. I haven't really looked at watches in years." Ethan nodded. "That's all right. Take your time. There's no rush." As the man wandered around the store, Ethan watched him, noticing the way he carefully examined each watch, as though he were deciding on something important. After a few moments, the man stopped in front of a simple, elegant watch. He didn't look at the price tag or any of the flashy features. He just seemed to appreciate the simplicity of it. Ethan walked over to him. "I see you've found one that you like." The man nodded, his face soft with nostalgia. "This one reminds me of the watch I bought for my wife a long time ago. She passed a few years ago and I haven't worn a watch since. But this one..." He trailed off, almost as if he were lost in thought. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He had seen so many people walk in, excited to buy the latest model, the most expensive piece, but this man wasn't looking for anything flashy. He was just looking for something that connected to a memory, a simple reminder of love and time well spent. Without saying a word, Ethan took the watch from the display and placed it gently in front of the man. "This one is special, isn't it? I think it would be perfect for you." The man's eyes softened and he smiled for the first time since he had walked in. "It is, I think I'll take it." As Ethan wrapped the watch carefully, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about selling a product. It was about helping this man reconnect with a piece of his past, a piece of his heart. The sale wasn't the victory. The moment of connection was. A few weeks later, Ethan received another email from Keanu. This time it wasn't an invitation or a quick note. It was a simple message, a check-in. "Hey, Ethan, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about how far you've come. I know things weren't easy for you in the beginning, but I've noticed a shift. I can tell you're really making a difference in people's lives now. Keep going. I'm proud of you." Ethan smiled as he read the words. He hadn't expected to hear from Keanu again, but this message, simple as it was, meant more to him than anything else. It was validation that he was on the right path, that the changes he had made, no matter how small, were real, and it reminded him of the power of kindness and how it could ripple through the world, touching lives in ways you could never predict. He thought back to that day when Keanu had walked into the boutique and how much he had learned since then. It wasn't just about the apology or the event. It was about the way Keanu had modeled grace, forgiveness, and humility. It had inspired Ethan to be better, not just for himself, but for the people around him. The truth was, Ethan had always felt like something was missing in his life. He had chased success and material things, thinking they would bring him happiness, but now he understood that true happiness came from something deeper, from connection, understanding, and genuine care for others. The store continued to thrive, but Ethan didn't define that success the way he used to. He still paid attention to the business side of things, but his focus was different. He wanted to create a space where people felt valued, where they didn't just come in to buy a watch, but to be seen, to be heard. One day, as he was preparing to close up, Clara walked up to him with a curious look on her face. "You've been quieter than usual," she said, folding her arms. "What's going on?" Ethan paused, thinking about her question. It wasn't like him to be silent, but the truth was, he had been reflecting a lot lately. "I don't know. I think I'm finally figuring things out. I spent so much time focusing on the wrong things. I always thought success was about what you could get. But now, I realize it's about what you give." Clara nodded, her expression softening. "You've really changed, you know that? Not just at work, but in general. It's like you're more at peace." Ethan smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. "I think I am, and I'm grateful for it. Grateful for everything. For the lessons, for the people who have shown me how to be better. It's not always easy, but I think it's worth it." Clara laughed softly. "I don't know what happened, but it's like you woke up one day and saw the world in a new light." Ethan chuckled. "Maybe I did. Or maybe the world was always there. I just had to learn how to see it." As the months passed, Ethan's life continued to unfold in ways he hadn't expected. He stayed in touch with Keanu occasionally, not as a celebrity, but as a friend. They shared occasional emails, talked about life, and sometimes met for coffee when Keanu was in town. But their friendship wasn't based on his fame. It was based on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared desire to make a difference. Ethan also became more involved in charitable causes, not because he wanted recognition, but because he felt it was important to give back. He started volunteering his time, offering support where it was needed, and using his position to advocate for causes he believed in. He wasn't trying to change the world, he was just trying to make it a little better, one small action at a time. It wasn't always easy. There were days when old habits crept back in, when he found himself stressing over numbers or chasing after fleeting goals. But now, he had the tools to recognize those moments and reset his focus. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be present, to be kind, and to keep learning. One morning, as Ethan was preparing to open the store, he looked around at the quiet space. The watches on the shelves gleamed. The sunlight streamed through the windows, and the soft sound of the door chime echoed through the boutique. It was just another day. But it wasn't just another day. It was a reminder that life in all its complexity wasn't about perfection. It was about being real, being human, and connecting with others in meaningful ways. And in that moment, as he took a deep breath and smiled to himself, Ethan knew he was exactly where he needed to be. And so, the journey continued. Ethan had learned that success wasn't measured by the things you owned, but by the love, respect, and connections you cultivated along the way. He knew there was still much to learn, but for the first time in his life, he was content. He was no longer chasing something outside of himself. Instead, he was living fully, appreciating the people and moments that truly mattered. The story had come full circle. The employee who once pushed Keanu Reeves out of the store had transformed into a man who knew what it meant to give, to listen, and to understand. And in that transformation, He had found his true success.